from the Financial Planning Committee, we want to ask you to be thinking about these 3 questions. And because we'll show these questions to you again after the presentation for your input. So what resonates with you, what gives you pause, and what might we have missed? And so those are our requests from you to think about those issues. And then finally, slide 5 for me, Arvid, thank you. Oh, can you read that? Just barely, maybe. So I'm going to provide sort of a quick big picture overview before Toby comes up here and gives you some more details about each of these recommendations. And as you can see, the basic idea driving this is to move from creating stability through driving down the deficit and taking care of the mortgage as best we can, to move towards really being able to plan sustainably. And so those recommendations are sort of moving in that kind of trajectory. And to say sustainably, we really mean financially, but also sort of, socially and environmentally, and, collectively in our faith work and ministry. Please note that specifics of when or how long or even in what order some of these things happen are not yet, completely ordained. The committee certainly has recommendations in that regard, and these will all be considered by council. And your input today on this is again, very important. So that's the overview, and I'm going to turn things over to Toby.
Thanks, Sarah. So we'll be moving from the overview slide in a second, but I'll just leave it up for a second and say, first of all, what a great experience it was working with this team. We had very robust conversations, and I think very truthful and good sharing, which is what we need to do, which is what we want to extend out today. It's just a view that we're bringing of some options that we could take going forward. A full acknowledgement to this congregation, to the leadership of council, but the whole congregation really, the last couple of years we know have been tough. There's been a lot of tough deliberations. There's been a lot of tough financial conversations. And that's been obviously said many times, but it goes with saying that I think it's made us stronger. I think as a group we've come together and has built it feels to me like ownership of this congregation, which is what we have. I sometimes marvel when I got here and I thought, okay, you sit in a pew and you listen to a sermon, and then slowly they pull you in, right? And you become a member, an active member of the congregation, and you realize, like, we're owners of this. Now, truly, God is owners of this, so that relieves us of some responsibility, but we still have that stewardship responsibility. And I'm so grateful to all the people from all the past who started this congregation, built that first piece, extended this congregation, paid off a mortgage, probably paid it off again, probably a third time, and that's part of our conversation today. It's a continuing cycle. So I've only had the privilege of being here with my family for 20 years. Some have been longer. I don't think anyone's been here since 1964. I could be wrong, though. But let's move on, and we're going to go through the recommendations with this being an open page, because we brought this, our congregation members brought this to council on Monday, and I think they had a good conversation. Hey, it's a pretty good sign they let us talk to you. But at the same time, I think it still has some work to do, and this feedback that we received today is really important. So if we could go to the next slide. You're going to see me squinting a bit. There are quite a few lines on here, and I'm not going to read them to you because I'm pretty sure you all can handle that. But I will say, obviously, we started the whole conversation last November, and we said, well, we got to pay off the deficit, that accumulated deficit that's been hanging around. We got some good news this morning. We also got it this morning. That was the first I heard. I figured we probably had a pretty good December, because this congregation is usually good for a good December. Very good news. So this piece obviously was a cornerstone to say, hey, before we do anything, let's make sure we've trued up our books. And we're $5,711 from that. Poor Belinda trying to get that number out this morning was tough for her. So I think you can see here some of the words we have. This is our first step. A fundraiser was a soft launch in December, and we'll get this one finished up here. And I don't think I'll spend too much more time with this one, except to say, fantastic. It's good to come with a plan that already has the first important step done. Feels good, right? Now, we didn't mean to do that. In November, we weren't sure what today would look like. Let's go to the next slide. So paying down the mortgage. You know, we had those sheets up on the wall there. I don't know if you read through some of the history piece. It was really nice to see it all up to date. We seem to get them up to date when we have to call a pastor, because we have to do that piece of work. But it was great to see it. And you'll note that we did have a big mortgage burning. It was about 20 some years ago, and no sooner was it burned, we started in, because we had building pieces. So we, as a group, we thought, like, there's some balance that has to happen here. Yeah, we don't like leaving mortgage for future us and for future congregants to have to pay down. It's not ideal. At the same time, we also got to think about our buildings. So I think you'll see in the next two recommendations that we're trying to find and strike the balance there. But an important event's happening in about a year, and that is our mortgage will become open. And church mortgages are very interesting things to get, let me tell you. If it's not an organization that specializes in doing church mortgages, they don't know what to do with us. I think when we got, before we got the mortgage, 20 years ago, it's around 20 years ago, we had to get a loan, and they wanted 3 guarantors from this congregation to sign off on the full amount, all 3 of them. It was like triple guarantee. That was how a bank treated us. So mortgages are kind of special. Now, luckily, there's organizations that also specialize in church mortgages, and they understand how we work, and they understand how to look at our balance sheets and so forth. And that's who we're with now. The one we have, which did change hands, so we're a little bit wondering, and we have some questions out to them. What does it look like now? Because we're going into about a year from now. What will it look like in terms of any hints on rates, like how much are you compared to prime rate and so forth? And we're waiting for some answers. But what we do know is that the previous mortgage was closed for 10 years with no prepayment privileges. Now, in exchange for that, they gave us a 3% rate, which was pretty solid. Even back in 2016, that was a pretty solid rate. But it does mean as it comes open, we'll have to see how it looks, but we may also come into a space where we don't have prepayment privileges again if it's the same organization. If they've changed that, it's usually in exchange with the rate, so the rate may be higher, and we know it'll be higher than 3%. So we think that this is a good year for us to think as a congregation, what do we want to do about that $151,000 that's going to come on March 1st and need to be renewed? The term would be for 10 more years. And the payment would depend on what the rate becomes. So the payment, like everyone in Canada, is going to be higher. So our recommendation is that we consider this through a fundraising campaign, starting in 2025 at some point when it makes sense within the cycle, to have money ready to pay that sucker down, at least as much as we think we can get away with. Okay, I'll move to the next slide. So on the balancing side, the other side is our property. I think it's probably fair to say that for the last decade, we've been pretty close to the bone on spending, and a lot of our cash flow has been dedicated to make sure we keep our building open and we pay our salaries. We accumulated up a deficit, we took some big actions, and during that time, we've struggled with some of the maintenance pieces. We have extremely dedicated people in our church. We had Ken here for quite a few years, which was a true blessing to keep things from truly falling apart. But we all know that nothing goes forever. Entropy, gets you every time, right? Things are gonna fall apart if they don't get their TLC. You can see here that there are some of the work that has been talked about for the better part of a decade, some exterior parts of our church, like the shakes. We know we have a roof now. One half of it's 20 years old. It was renewed 20 years ago. The other half was more like 10 years ago. Those two pieces are a big part of that mortgage piece that we've been working through. And flat roofs, oh, why? But here we are. This is the building that was bequested to us from generations before, flat roof. They take maintenance, and the maintenance is expensive. So we know we're going to have bills coming up. And the last time we were in this exact spot 25 years ago, we said, let's pay off the mortgage. This congregation rallied. If you were here, you remember it was a big deal. And the mortgage, it was a pretty big stretch to get it down. And we did it. And then 2 years later, we're in a mortgage situation. So how do we actually try to see what we can do with that? We don't know if big emergencies are going to come. Ken was pretty good at understanding our building. I think we're still in a maintenance mode, but we know we need money for this. So with no further ado, we recommend dedicating income received from the daycare rental to a property maintenance and repair to kind of just pull that money aside. Congregational councils talked about this since we had a daycare, so successive councils for quite a few years. And of course, we always struggle with, but can we afford to? We still have to pay the monthly bills. And it's going to take some resolve, obviously, because that money going there means that to make sure all the other expenses are paid for will be on the congregation. But that's our recommendation. We think it makes sense. Our lovely young ones there are consuming the building. I don't think they're too hard on it. I think we have a very good partnership, but it has some congruence, at least to our minds. I'll go to the next slide, and we're almost at the end here and move to those questions. But the fourth piece is around cash reserve. So I'll just start with the end here. We recommend that we develop a cash reserve. We've put 2 months here. We know that any cash reserve is better than no cash reserve. This congregation has had cash reserves in the past, and they disappeared. And I can tell you at the time when they disappeared, we're sure glad we had them because stuff happens in churches, whether it's an unexpected expenditure or an unexpected drop in income. That's typically something that is a little hard to plan around. So what can you plan around? Being ready and having some buffer. We do think that in the priority of things, the cash reserve, going to develop all 3 at once might be a bit of a challenge, but as we get past some of this mortgage time and we get past some of having the funds available for some more roof things, perhaps later into next year, we start seriously thinking, how do we develop that? If you're wondering how we absorb things today, we have designated offerings, and we have a line of credit. Designated offerings is basically free borrowing, but you gotta be careful because those designated offerings should be ready for use for whatever they were designated for. And then we have the line of credit, which is not free borrowing, not even close. So we certainly, like in a perfect world, we'd like to get rid of that sucker, I think, eventually, and just have a cash reserve. So those are our key pieces here. We do have variation through the year. We do sometimes get caught short on income, and it would be great for us to be able to basically have these pieces all in place so that we can get on with the important work of a church. Because the work of a church isn't to have a building, and the work of a church isn't to have a great balance sheet. The work of a church is to do the mission that God wants us to do. But having those things keeps our attention on what we should be doing, which is God's work. And we do know that we sometimes get pulled back in focus when we start having to talk about finance all the time. After many years on council, and these folks have also all been on council, many of you have been on council, you know that becomes such a hot part of the conversation when it gets tight, and that distracts us from our real mission. So I think that's the end of our slides, am I correct? And then we can go to the questions. So Sarah, am I turning it back to you?
I think so. We're turning it over to these.
I'm turning it back to you to turn it over to them.
And maybe
Thank you, everyone.
Maybe the next slide, Arvid, to remind people of the questions would be great.
Paul.
Yeah, the other Paul. So questions? You remember we have, what resonates with you in these recommendations? What makes you nervous or gives you pause? What have we missed? I missed the S in gives in the second question. So, questions from anyone?
Well, what I think of, looking at myself, is the age of the congregation. I'm alive far longer than I expected to be. Recently turned 89, and that's 20-some years more than anyone else in my family. And I was interested seeing, having a senior moment. My mind has gone blank.
Toby.
His family, all the way down the line, are kind of staunch members of the congregation. But I congratulate him on being one of a very small number where the family follows along in the congregation. Gail and I have family, but they're scattered all the way from Minneapolis to Vancouver, and the one that here isn't mildly interested in her. He happens to be gay. So, what I wonder is where the members will come from that will sustain the church in the future. I look around, well, not too many of us without gray hair. And so that's a question in my mind, and I don't know if people who have been in council have any view of how our congregation is aging. That's the thing that worries me, is I'll be lucky if I'm here in 3 or 4 years, and I don't know how many other fall into that situation, and I don't see a lot of younger people joining our congregation.
There's one.
How many for next Sunday?
Something that makes me nervous or gives me pause is aging in the congregation.
No, and it's true. The congregation, as you say, when I sit and I look ahead of me, there's a lot of gray hair. But the other thing to notice is, we have usually a fair number of people for the children's part of the service. We had 16, I think. Pastor Prema can correct me, doing the Christmas play. So there. I mean, I think we tend, us older folk tend to notice other older folk and talk to them. But there are a fair number of younger families moving in, and we're building this as much for them as for us. And there is work being done on council through the communications committee. We have some members here who, we've been going on social media, and there are new people through the door. I think we need to spend more time as a council and as a congregation figuring out what we're going to do for these new people when they walk through the door, and hope they'll stay with us. But there's a lot of work on that. When you go to the website, you'll see there's a lot of work being done on that side as well, because younger people tend to get their information online rather than the old ways. But there were a number of people who had questions. And Arvid, I think you had a question before. So. Okay. We have, as Toby pointed out, we've been through this before. We have a mortgage reduction line, and I'm assuming that that the treasurer could do with the mortgage reduction what we did with the SEBA loan. You accumulate the money, you put it perhaps in a GIC, and then when the time comes, you have that money to pay down the mortgage. Is that, Arvid, the question?
Well, I guess all I'm saying is we just have to have a way to monitor and actually be able to come to the congregation, whatever it's monthly, whatever it's, we've had this much money come in.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, so something like what we had for the disappear, the deficit, and we had earlier for the, when the children were raising money at Christmas time, right, to indicate where we're at with it.
I think we're covered off. That's Paul, you got that right, for sure. We haven't talked about it much because there hasn't been a lot of push over 10 years, because it would just basically sit there for 10 years because we didn't have the ability to pay down the mortgage. So then now with that opening up, we'll be going back. It still sits on the books as an easy line to put money into. You know, I remember back counting money, and there was a person in our congregation. She was more senior, and she's no longer with us. And every week she would write a check, and she had her designations, and she'd always put $23 for mortgage reduction. It was such a joy to see, like every single week she put this down, along with a couple of other designations. So there is a long tradition. It's a bit lapsed in our memory now. It's time to refresh that, and obviously information like that or in the newsletter and so forth would be foundational to any kind of campaign that council would sponsor.
I think, Arvid, part of your question is we've been saying we relied too much on designated funds, right? Our designated funds can be a problem if they are not usable. But I think in this case where FPC, the committee is recommending a campaign that is designated to the mortgage so that people would be giving quite specifically, right, and into that campaign to pay down the mortgage. Absolutely. Well, you reuse the pom-poms.
And Wendy, you had a question? I think David has a question.
I'm wondering if, so one of two, I suppose. I was wondering if we could make a new line, and I trust your wordsmithing on this, something, maybe the umbrella fund, so that when there's a rainy day, we're not going to be getting wet. And it could include the mortgage, but hopefully we won't need that for very long because we're going to pay off the mortgage.
Right.
But the fund would be for when the shingles go, or when we suddenly have to call a new pastor that is in a higher pay grade, or whatever it is. I don't know. That would be an ongoing expense, but maybe not necessarily maintenance expense. It could be something else.
Right.
But an umbrella fund where it would be long-term savings for the rainy days.
And yeah, I think you're really talking to recommendation 3, which is about taking the money from the daycare rental, and two things.
Actually, 4.
Okay, yeah, well that's I mean, and I want to come back to 3 for a minute, because working on this, when we took out the mortgage, we knew what our expenses were. We got what is it called, a projected amortization schedule. We knew it, and as a church, we planned for that, and we put the money aside. As Dan Lohan, who is here from the property committee, can tell you, buildings have their own. There is a predictable schedule of work that needs to be done, and I think one of the things we've struggled with as a church is we've never found a way of putting aside money to handle those real costs going forward. I mean, Dan can tell you, when things have to be replaced. I mean, it's ongoing, right? And we've always tried to ad hoc that, to pay it out of what we have. And our proposal here is to, is to put that money aside on a regular basis so we have it. Now, and Toby can speak to this better than I can. I mean, this is not a designated offering. It sits there in an account. Its primary purpose is for property maintenance and repair. But if we had some other kind of emergency, I assume we'd go to that, right? I mean, we'd always be weighing our options. So that is that is our version of an umbrella fund. We also need the 2 months of cash reserves, but that will last us 2 months, right? So the more we can plan, the more we can save. The better we'll be able to absorb risks, on rainy days or very cold days.
Orbit, can you go back one slide maybe for the summary? That would be helpful. Can you see that? Okay.
Okay. I think David is next, and then I can come back to you. So do you, yes?
Having never held a mortgage on a church, can we pay off the mortgage when it's due?
Yes, if we have the funds, when it comes open, we can annihilate it. We've been looking for the right word to do that.
Yeah.
I'm trying out annihilate,
Yeah.
but it's a strong word.
Yeah. Yes. So if the question is, can we pay the mortgage off, the church mortgage off when it comes due in March 2026? The answer is yes. And we can burn another mortgage. Okay. Other questions from other people?
Or comments.
Comments? Yes.
I have a question.
Yes.
I realize we don't know what the roof will cost or anything like that. But do we not even have an approximate amount? Like, is the roof going to be $200,000? Do we sort of look towards that amount? Or,
Okay. And I mean,
I know it can't be actual, but
Right.
is it not, doesn't anybody have an approximate?
Yeah.
What did we pay last time? I don't recall what we paid.
So the question is about the cost of replacing the roof, the roof over the sanctuary, I believe. I think you're asking for kind of a ballpark figure, and whatever we think it's going to cost, when we get the quotes, it usually costs more than that. I don't know if Dan or Toby can give a figure about what it costs, or what the...
Like, what are we shooting for? Are we shooting for 200,000? Are we shooting for 150,000? There's a big difference.
Yeah, and certainly defer to Dan if he has more information. But I can tell you, in 2000, after the flood in 2004, then we got to work as, buckets all over. The church was not a good sign. And at that time, it took us a couple of years to scope it out. We did take a mortgage at that time for $200,000. I believe, I'm going from memory here, about $140,000 of that was to do roof, and that was for half the building. And then about 10 years later, when we rolled the remaining part of that mortgage into the new mortgage, and you saw the figure of $265, we did the other half of the roof, plus we did a couple of other things, probably a similar amount. I think it was a little bit less. Now, we haven't just been sitting. Our property folks haven't just been sitting saying, well, there's a roof and eventually it'll be gone and we need $300,000. Like they have been actually monitoring it and trying to do the preventative maintenance to extend the life. And I'm not sure if Dan would be able to speak to that or not, but I know that Gord would often tell us at council back, like they went up, they did the inspection, they did a little bit of TLC and so forth. So hopefully we're not looking at a roof like next year. We have some other pieces we have to do, but we know it's in our future.
Dan, do you want to speak to this?
I think you covered it quite well. The problem we have architecturally, we got some problems up here, so that makes it a pretty big unknown. Because where the leaks are coming from, we hard to tell without even exploring it, we've got no answers yet. So that also makes your car somebody determine it and figure out what it is, and you probably don't know until you start it.
Yeah. Sure. Okay, other questions? Corolla, I think I see, and
I'll just talk loud.
But people online need to
Oh,
hear.
right, okay, sorry. So my understanding is, two questions. Number one, my understanding is there was an estimate done for roof repair back in 2017 that we put off and put off and put off. And I think if I remember the numbers right, it was about $20,000, Bev. So if you take that number and just double it, because time has gone by, and also whenever you do a renovation, it's always more expensive. It never gets cheaper. You're probably looking at around $40,000 to $50,000 ballpark, and that's from a non-construction. I've done a reno in my past and know it always goes up type of experience. So that was one question. Number two, with regards to the mortgage, can we pay off part of it? Like it's 150. I know some mortgages, they only allow you to pay off like 10% or things like that. Can we pay off like 20 or 30 or? Yes, I understand that, David. But can we part pay it?
Can I answer the first question, then
Yeah,
give
sure.
it over to Tony
Shoot.
for the second? And I think the figures you're referring to are for the vertical shingles that are on
Okay.
the east side of the building.
All right.
So they're, that quote was 2017, and the plan then was to the shingles were rotting and so on. The question about the decking underneath was and so we had two estimates. One was both from A. Clark Roofing, right, and to remove and dispose of the shingles and then to replace it with siding. And one of them, the fasteners showed, and one the fasteners didn't show. I think the challenge for, and Dan's alluded to this already, the challenge for the property committee is not only finding the problem, but figuring out what the fix is, right? And so that was, those are vertical shingles. They're more decorative, I think, than because they've now found out it's concrete underneath. So it's that's not the kind of roofing problem we're talking about.
Sorry. I didn't
No,
realize
that's
that.
and the second part.
You don't have to step down. Maybe just real quick on the roof. The building like this, just say a big project and say 50,000 is probably safe, right? Like we know that the pieces will cost, and I think the point is very good, right? To take the cost, double it up. We all know what's happened in the last few years, and that's probably realistic, whether it's the roof or some other pieces. So we're gonna need to spend some money on this, I think, is the upshot. On the mortgage question. So just like typically in Canada, there's 5-year terms, right? And when you get to the end of your 5-year term, you can move mortgage providers, you could pay it all off. It's that scenario. If we don't have the $151,000 to pay it all off, then we would flip it into a new mortgage at a lower level. So any amount between $0 and $151,000 is going to make our future a little easier to deal with. And so we have flexibility. Probably really only then. Then, Corolla, to your point, trying to find out if they've changed their terms. If they lock us in for another 10 years with no prepayments, then we would be on a track for 10 years and we would just make our monthly payment. If they've changed their policy and allow for some prepayment at some point, maybe after a couple of years, they let you do 10% a year, those type of things. We're still not 100% clear on those pieces, but we do know that when we get to that March 1st date, we have a lot of flexibility.
Yes, and Harry is next.
Just my compliments to the committee. I like the plan that you've laid out. It looks very comprehensive, it's very thoughtful, and it gives us a way forward. I think that many of us are tired of hearing about finances, as we've talked about over the last couple of years, but I think it's important that we keep bringing forward information. I know that I've been here in this building within the last couple of years where it's been raining and Pastor Trish put out a bucket in the narthex because it was leaking, and I'm not sure how many of us realize that we have these little things going on that need to be addressed. So again, compliments to the committee for putting together this plan. I think it's very comprehensive. The only thing I would add to it as well is that, like Dave said, we don't lose sight of why, and Toby as well, that we don't lose sight of why we're doing this. That we continue to talk also about how we invite people in how we work with the community, how we work with other congregations, how we continue to do the work of the church. So we're keeping our focus on the purpose of this in the end as well.
Thank you. The earlier version of this, the one that came around, I'm not asking you ever to go back, but at the top it had on the one side creating stability and moving towards planning sustainably. And I think all of this is for us to, to get out of what Belinda in her Treasury's report for December, for November said we've been through a whirlwind, and this is to try. The point of these things is to create stability, and the point of creating stability is not only so we can breathe a little more easily, but also so we can begin not only sustainably funding the repairs we need, but also looking after the ministries and funding them adequately and increasing where we want and need to. It gives us, having the stability gives us options, and I think that's the core of this. Other questions?
Here, a lot of us, Randy Froelich, a lot of us have, as I said, little or no hair or gray hair. What is happening to our youth? What are we building our youth basically? Because they're the ones that are going to become responsible for things down the road. Is our youth, our younger population increasing? Because right now we see a lot of gray hairs. Do you know what I'm saying? And they're holding the building together. Where are we with respect to that?
I think I can let other people. I think I've answered this once. What I'd say, for the first thing, we had some sort of ordinary miracles in the church, and one of them was last year at this time when we were looking for new members, and we had no idea. We needed a lot of new members, a lot of new council members, and we got 12. And the reason I mention that is 2 of them are young people. Eric Davidson and Christopher Schneider. As I say, we in the church tend to see other people our age, but there are youth in the church, and I think as a church we want to do more for young people than we're doing currently. That would be one of the ministries I think we'd like to develop.
I'll add a couple of things and then Toby. A couple of things to add. One is, if you recall Caitlin's word cloud from, was it last Sunday? Announcements about for the call committee and the survey that's gone out to the congregation, that youth and youth ministry is a real emphasis, right? That council's very aware of as well, and in the call process is going to be one of the key issues. I would also say that among the sort of questions and conversations happening among congregations. So members of congregational councils have been meeting here in Edmonton, and this has been probably the number one sort of point of interest around collaboration, or one of the top ones, to how do we make sure we are working together to support and encourage youth.
Maybe just add a couple of things. First of all, it's not unusual to not see a lot of young people at a financial committee conversation. So of course we have this kind of vibe here, and that's pretty natural. I've been going to church my entire life, and I don't think I would have darkened the door for this kind of conversation until they hauled me on to council, and then I had to, and then eventually it was like, actually, no, this is important, thinking about the future. I think my impression through the collaboration committee and going to some other churches over time is that it could be worse, folks. There are some churches out there where you're just like, holy, is the average age over 65? Like it's wild, right? And you're going, wow. That, I think we have some really strong roots. And, you all remember when we had the 2 services and we closed our 11 o'clock Sunday school. Does anyone remember that? And we said, no, we're going to focus on 9:15. You know what we realized out of that? That was the death of the 11 o'clock service. We could not have a sustainable 11 o'clock service unless we had Sunday school. That's actually when Wendy and I moved to 11 o'clock service. Plus, I think we like the hymns a bit more than the praise team music. They're both good. But we actually were like, we want to see a Sunday school at 11 o'clock, because where is this going to go without it? Now, times have changed and things have moved on, but it's true. That's where the hope is with the young folks. Last thing I would say is we have good roots on this, but best thing we can do is also, okay, the young folks maybe aren't paying that much attention to the finances, but if they were smart, they'd come into a church and say, what does your balance sheet look like? Because, you know, these folks here, they're not going to be here forever. Unfortunately, none of us are going to be here forever. And then if we're part of this church, like, we're owning this, and there's not that many of us. So I think one of the gifts we can do for this ministry is to make sure that we're in a good financial place with our building, with our balance sheet, and allow maybe a smaller congregation of people who are now younger, eventually they'll be all like us, to be able to thrive in space and let the ministry do the work it needs to do, like Paul talked about.
Are there questions? I think that's Dave back there.
Yeah, no comment. I think it's the bald spot. My name's Dave Unsworth. I have a different thought process, but I really liked what you said there, Toby. But you talked about us taking care of the youth in the future, in the time going forward. And you're trying to do this through this plan. And the plan makes a lot of sense. I wonder if it wouldn't make more sense to take some of the money that's being put away and putting it into either the endowment fund or a version of the endowment fund to be able to take care of the youth 100 years from now instead of just 20 years from now. In other words, if we took if we're putting in $1,000 a year now, which we do at the AGM, and we're now getting back $700 approximately a year out of that endowment fund, if we double it, we get $1,400. If we double it, and we get it the rest of our lives, as opposed to just 20 years from now. So are we better off taking some of this and looking 100 years in the future for our grandkids? Or are we better off doing this and taking care of everything in the next 10 years? I don't have the answer. It's my concern.
Dave, thanks. I know you've been a huge champion for the endowment process for many years. We could all have views of this. We could all have opinions. I have a balancing point for myself on endowments. One is that it creates some funding stability, especially as it grows and they get bigger and there's more dollars involved, right? The other side, there's something very vibrant about us all being here and having this conversation and having to struggle with this and having to take that thing out every week and say, we make this place run. So we got kind of this balancing point that we need. So in no way am I against endowments, but I would hate to rob us of the struggle, because the struggle is part of our ministry. It's part of our stewardship. And so, Dave, if someone came along and said, we're going to endow you as a church to have all of your operating money, what a problem that would be, right? We could make lots of arguments what that would mean for us as a church. We don't have that problem. I think building it as part of the view here, I guess the one thing I would say here is, if we kill our mortgage, then I'd love to have that conversation more, because, but you know, at the same time, you might counter and say, when you plant a tree, best time to plant a tree. They attribute this to Martin Luther, so we better say it today, right? Best time to plant a tree, 20 years ago. Second best time, today.
And I think it's really important that conversations at the Financial Planning Committee and at Council are really revolving around this very issue of sort of, do we do several things at once? Do we do things in sequence? If so, in what kind of sequence? How much do we overlap, right, each of these things that we're doing? So thank you for raising it, Dave, because it does really make us think about what are we doing when, right? And based on what, right, set of values about what's the best timing. So there's no great answer, but it's an incredibly important question.
Arvid?
Well, I think we'd all agree that this is a long-term thing, but I think it seems to me that we have an opportunity in this coming year for the mortgage. So I'm sort of thinking that we should be concentrating on that, and then if we get that dealt with, that makes some of these other things easier, but
Thank you, Arvid. The one thing I would say is that I don't think it's an either or, that we either do the mortgage or we do, or we save the money. I think it's possible to do both, but that's a conversation that we need to have as a working group, and the council needs to have, and go and take it from there. We promised not to keep you too long, and I don't know if we kept that promise, but other questions? If not, Karen.
Okay, thanks. Karen Oko is my name, and I guess my question was more along the lines of just exactly what you just talked about. Do we want to focus on reducing the mortgage now and for the next year, and that's our total focus, or are we also suggesting, and your suggestion here is using all or most of the revenue from the daycare to save some funds? And what does that do to our operating expenses? And if and obviously not maybe designating, but if we take the dollars from that daycare revenue, does that change our bottom line for being able to pay off the mortgage?
I mean, I think that's up to each member of the congregation to decide. I mean, because we're asking for funding on an ongoing basis from members, and on this special occasion for this next year, we have an opportunity to pay additional money for the mortgage. So it's. I've lost my train of thought here, I think. Must be time. And I do remember that it's not December 19th today, it's January 19th, I think. No, so I think we, Karen, I'd like to think we could do both. I know that putting the money aside, whenever we do this individually, families, right? You're trying to save for something. It's always hard at the beginning, because you think, well, where's this going to come from, right? But if we can get that habit going, then then we forget it, right? We just do it, and that gives us the options going forward. So I think we need, as a congregation, just at least wrestle with this and say, can we do this? Can we take the money that we, from the daycare revenue? Here's was the thought. When I looked at the budget for that Belinda prepared, and I saw the money for the property repairs and for a number of things, it added up to more than the cost of the $39,000 we put aside each year. So I think we're capable of doing that. I mean, and this, to go back to the earlier thing, the money, if we took the $3,300 each month, we put it in a fund, we put it in a separate account. It's not part of our operating revenue, we wouldn't have those big lines for property, right? Because we don't know at this point what it's going to cost, and when we needed to do property repair, it would come out of this other fund. Right, so there's some accounting that needs to be done, but my sense, and I don't know, Sarah, others who've looked at the budget could contradict me or collaborate. My sense is that their money is there at present to get this started. I think our biggest obstacle initially is overcoming our sense of I don't think we can do this. I think we can. Right, it's just going to be a challenge initially.
I'm Darlene Froelich. I've been kind of sitting here listening to all of you, and I think what I'm hearing is you're all afraid. But you know what? You have to start somewhere, and the somewhere starts with your first step. And I think this is our first step. Doesn't mean it's written in stone that this is what we have to do for years and years on end. This is going to be, if this church is going to survive, we need to do this on an ongoing basis. We have to change the way we do business, because the church itself is a business. This building is a business, and you have to look at it as a business. Now, that business supports our worship ministry. And I feel that we all need to take that extra step. And I think, unfortunately, I'm not going to be here to hear all of the conversation around this particular thing at the AGM, but I hope that you all take away something from here and bring it with you to those that aren't here who will be at the AGM, and try to figure this out, because I think we've got to do something, and I think this is a good first step, but it's not the end step.
Thank you. If there are no more questions, he said pausing, then I want to thank you for the time and energy. Sarah used an expression yesterday that, and she does this to me occasionally, she used expressions that I haven't heard for a while, and she used it again today. She said we need to wrap our heads around this. I've always struggled with that one because I want to take it literally. And we are all wrapping our heads around this. So my sense is you may have questions going forward. You may have thoughts, and so please consider, buttonhole one of us, tell us, or talk to us next week, because this is an ongoing conversation, and we're all in the business of wrapping. And right now, I will wrap up. Thank you very much. Thank you.
We can do